Welcome to the JB Media Digital Drop-In. We're so glad to have everybody here. My name is Sarah Benoit. I'm the lead instructor of the JB Media Institute. And today it's going to be just me. Usually we have Justin with us and we have other guests, but Justin is currently away on paternity leave, so he will be back in March to join us. A few housekeeping items if you're new to the Digital Drop-In. One is that we are recording this on Zoom, and so during the call at any time, if you'd like to submit questions, you can either chat them into the chat or use the raise your hand feature and type in whatever questions you have. So as we go along, I really encourage everybody to share any feedback they have or questions they have about what we're going to talk about. Also, everyone who signed up today, you will get a copy of the recording along with a download of my slides. So you don't have to try to remember everything. You will be able to review this later on and download the presentation and actually click on the links and check out some of the things that I suggest. If you're one of our current JB Media students, then by tomorrow you will see that I've posted the recording and the slides to your online classroom. So everybody will have access to this information after the fact. So today I'm really excited because we started this conversation in the fall. Some of you may have attended the SEO reality check, sort of part one that I did, where we featured Leah Shapiro and David Gwaltney from the JB Media Group agency. And essentially I want to continue this conversation about SEO throughout the rest of the year and really dig in more to what has changed about search engine optimization. So today, that's what we're going to dig into. We're going to talk a little bit more conceptually about how we understand Google, especially, and its role in search engine optimization and its role in basically our daily lives. So again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Benoit. I'm the co-founder and lead instructor of the JB Media Institute. I also own a web design company here in Asheville where I specialize in search engine optimization called Creative Original. So when I started my career in 2003, SEO was really my core passion. It's what got me excited. It's what made me feel like busting into essentially an industry that barely existed when I started. So for me, search engine optimization was kind of that thing that sparked my move into technology, because prior to that, I was a writer. I had studied English. I had mostly worked in customer service in a variety of different industries, but especially in the tourism world. And so I had really spent a lot more time focusing on communications. And what I saw when I first connected in with Google and the idea that people would want to optimize their websites in 2001, 2002, what I really connected in with was this realization that Google was going to kind of lead the way of giving people access to data across the world. And I felt like that was going to open up huge opportunities from a communications perspective. So I started focusing on digital and I started focusing on the web. And I'm sure you're wondering why I have a picture of Ricky Martin up here. But the reason I called this webinar today, Livin' La Vida Loca, is essentially because I feel like in the time that I've been working in the search engine optimization field, it has literally just become a completely different world. It is not the same industry that I started in. And even the tactics and strategies and best practices have just shifted so much over the last, 15 to 17 years that we really have to sort of reinvent the way that we see search engines and the way that we understand SEO. So many of you have heard that I feel like SEO really isn't even a service anymore. It isn't really something you can buy from a company. Good search engine optimization is about understanding especially Google and how it perceives websites and content on websites, and really delivering the best experience possible for people and having some real expertise and authority and trustworthiness and credibility in what we're doing online. And I think the standard for that is much higher when we're representing businesses and organizations and brands. So of course, individuals can go onto the internet and do a lot of things where it can be very opinion based, right? But the truth is, when Google looks at business websites and informational websites and different websites that are providing content that could potentially help people, in a lot of ways, they're judging you at a much higher sort of standard. Essentially because it's really important to them that when they produce a result for somebody looking for a product or service, that they get the most reliable information they can. So part of why I think this industry is, so exciting is because it's so crazy, because the changes have been so deep, and because search engine optimization is so connected to the experience that we're having online and the experience that people are having when they engage with the technology, right? And so that means that we're at the mercy of the public. We're at the mercy of what they adopt when it comes to technology. We see that search engines follow the trends of human behavior and the way that we use different things like our smartphones. So it creates a really fascinating, exciting industry to work within. But again, when you're DIYing it, it creates a much more complicated, sort of frustrating and confusing world to try to navigate. So that's what I'm hopefully going to do for you today is let's work out some of this craziness. Let's talk about some of the core principles, especially around content, since so many of us are out there building websites, doing social media, creating email marketing, writing articles, blogging, and all these different things. How can we make sure that those efforts are really focused and that what we're contributing to the web is something of real value that really serves people and not just creating content for content's sake. And hopefully I'll be able to, at the end, give you some cool action steps right away that you can take to try to take what we talk about today and actually implement it into your perspective and your strategy and your approach. The other reason I wanted to say live in La Vida Loca and bring a little Ricky Martin into this is because I feel like working in this industry, one thing that you have to be willing to do sometimes is dance it off, right? And stay positive about things because there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, especially when you start paying attention to the longer perspective of your brand's kind of presence across the web. You'll start to see that, there's a lot of kind of roller coaster rides that happen, where you do well and then it's, slows down and then you do well again and it slows down. And the key thing is to know that while you're going through that process of the ups and downs, that there's a bigger picture that you can look at. And that bigger picture can tell you whether or not, from a search perspective, you're trending up. So I think you have to have fun with this. You have to get into sort of a groove with it. You have to be excited to keep relearning things and understanding things and challenging your mind to maybe stretch a little and think outside of what you thought SEO is or how it's going to work. It's like, get excited about the challenge. When you're frustrated, dance it off and have a good time. So like I said, this first little part, I want to talk about some of the basic kind of foundational principles that I think don't get talked about enough. So if you've been to some of my other webinars, we've covered keyword research a lot of different times. We've covered how to turn keyword research into content ideas. We've covered videos and how to better optimize them. Even in our last conversation in the fall, in the SEO Reality Check Part 1, we talked to Leah Shapiro and David Gwaltney about different kind of tactics and strategies that are being used in the industry regularly and tried to clarify where you should spend your time. So I want to talk about some things that don't get talked about as often. And one thing I wanted to start with is just the definition of optimization or what it means to optimize things. And I think the key thing we want to start with is that when you are optimizing for search engines, you are basically making decisions, using strategies, learning and following standards so that you can try to make your website and your overall online presence, not just your website, but even all the other things that link back to your website, as fully functional and effective as possible. I often tell students, you're never going to meet 100% of Google's criteria. It's almost impossible, especially for smaller companies. We just don't have the bandwidth to take all the time it needs that we would need to meet every single standard Google puts out. But we can look for every opportunity that we have to meet their standards and constantly have this vision of how we can always improve, we can always get better and stronger, right? So the idea isn't to kind of think of optimization or optimizing your website as a one-time thing. It's really this process. It's this thing that you're going to be working on over and over and over. And the goal is to just keep achieving as much as possible every single month, every single year, and to always have an idea of what Google's looking for and what other search engines are looking for, so that when you're making decisions, you can grab an opportunity that you see there. So there's social media opportunities that sometimes can help you build authority. There are different partnership opportunities that will help you build authority. So it's about knowing what those opportunities are and making sure that you take them when they're in front of you. So keep that in mind, because a lot of times we want to think of SEO as a thing we can do, and that's not really how it works. So the first thing I want to talk about is that I recently studied Google's search quality rating program guidelines. So these are the guidelines that they use for people that are going to become search quality raters. And these are individual people that are actually going to look at different results and rate them based on the criteria that Google has laid out. So these guidelines are a 168-page guide that really digs into how Google defines quality content. And that's what I want to start out talking about today, because I think this is something that's a little bit technical and kind of long to read, but I've highlighted some things that I think are accessible to everybody. So the first thing you have to understand is that when people are working as basically page quality raters, they are looking at basically page quality, or what Google calls PQ, as kind of their goal. And what's going to happen is they're going to be looking at different URLs, doing different tasks, and how they go through things is recorded. And they are trained by the guidelines that I'm talking about today to look for certain things and to judge the quality of different pages of different websites based on criteria. So, and very specific criteria, which is really interesting. Now, one thing that I think this brings home that I think some of you have heard me say is that Google doesn't just rank websites. Google ranks every page of every website. So that's why every page of your website is an opportunity to show up in the Google rankings and to drive traffic into your website. The ultimate goal of having a PQ is basically so that we can evaluate how well each web page is achieving the purpose that it's created for. So again, if you've ever heard me talk about website usability, I talk a lot about how essentially if you don't know the purpose of the page of your website that you're trying to get to rank, nobody else knows the purpose either. And Google's judging you by whether or not it can understand the reason that that page exists, right? So it's really important to understand this relationship, that when we talk about having a purpose for each page of your website, being clear about it, being usable, essentially what we're talking about is how can we meet the standards of the PQ that Google offers. So each web page, like I said, should have a reason for being created, a reason for existing on the website. And essentially every page on the internet is typically created for some reason, and sometimes one page can have multiple purposes. So there's 3 or 4 reasons why we've created a page about a topic or about an event with different clickable calls to action. The goal really is to think clearly, I think, on your own website about which pages were created to help people, to entertain people, to provide them with value. Which pages really aren't going to provide much value, but they're there to sort of convert people and get them to make purchases, right? So this goes back to some of the conversations we've had in digital drop-ins before about search intent, right? And whether the intent is educational or investigative, or whether that intent is transactional, right? So that should be related to kind of the reason or the purpose that the page exists. And what the PQ is really trying to give a kind of rating to, or provide some number data to, is essentially does Google believe that this page is achieving the purpose that it's for? And again, this is so individual people who are page quality writers can do this process. And of course, their AI is also doing this process. So they're doing both of these things to try to ensure the pages that are at the top getting more traffic are the most high quality pages. And I think Google, you'll see when you read what they're sharing with people, they talk a lot about how important it is to help people, serve people, provide something of value to people. So there's common purposes that your web pages might have. You might be looking to share information. You might be looking to actually provide not just information about a topic, but more personal or social information about your brand, about the people involved with it. You might be looking to share different types of media. You might have videos you want people to watch. You might have different content visually that you want them to engage with. You might be trying to express an opinion. You might be trying just to have fun and entertain people and get them to pay attention to what you're doing. You might actually be trying to complete sales or generate leads. You might be trying to give away free content in order to generate leads. And you might even be doing different things related to really engaging directly on a website, getting people to ask questions, getting people to click the share button. So all of these things can be related to what the goals or what the purpose of the page is. So I think when we're looking at SEO, and I'm going to recommend some action steps at the end, one of those things that we're really looking at is, like I said, where do we have opportunities to better optimize and try to become what Google really wants us to become? So we're looking for pages that are going to create more opportunities for that. And then we're trying to evaluate how clear the purpose of the page is and, maybe refine it a bit, maybe shift the layouts, maybe adjust the headers, right? So that's how we kind of go from looking at what's working and how things are going on our website to choosing kind of which pages are the best choices to try to drive more traffic from Google. But again, we'll talk about that more towards the end. So Google identifies 3 different types of content on each page of the website. They refer to these as MC, SC, and ads, but that's main content, supplementary content, and advertisements or monetization. So basically, these different areas of content are being judged differently. And so this is, I think, something important to understand. I also think this helps you when you are doing keyword research and trying to grow your website in a way that's going to be more attractive to Google. It allows you to think about how you can build out sections of the website that might have some main content and then supplementary content around it. So again, main content is any part of the page that directly helps the page achieve its purpose. So like I said, this is going to be related more to kind of the body of the page, the headings on the page, even the buttons and the calls to action, I think, are part of the main content. It can also be videos, it can be images, and things like that that are related to helping people achieve whatever it is you want them to achieve on the page. So their reason for being there, anything that really is upfront supporting that is going to be considered the main content. And I think anything on the page that can be scanned easily when people first hit the page is going to be considered part of the main content. Supplementary content is basically content that's created around that main content to improve the user experience on the page. So it might not be the sort of direct content that promotes whatever you're trying to promote, but it's supplementary content that helps with that. So it may be links. Let's say you're talking about a particular topic and then you want to link over to another page with a class or an event that is related. That class or event page becomes sort of supplementary content. Sometimes you'll have on a website page tabs, or you'll have an accordion where you can click and it'll open up content. Sometimes that content is considered supplementary, right? So, it's kind of like longer form content that's put throughout the page where people can engage when they need more information. They click on it, they get more details. That can be considered complementary. So anything that's kind of surrounding that main page and the main content, the MC there, is going to be considered supplementary content. And then you have ads, and this is really only going to count for people who are maybe doing some sort of actual ad placement on their websites. Maybe they have things like Google AdSense. Maybe they have products for sale, and those products are peppered throughout the page, right, in order to monetize it. So all of those things are going to fall into their own category. And, a lot of times we just have to remember that even though ads can sometimes be considered lower quality content, that's not always true, because it's all about how it relates to the purpose of the page, how well connected the topics of the ads and the purpose of the ads are to the purpose of the main content itself. So you don't have to assume that just because you have ads or monetization that you're going to get lower quality ratings. It's all about whether or not those ads look good, whether or not they fit in with the content that the person is reading about, and all of that, because the goal is for the ads to improve the user experience as well as the main content and the supplementary content. So if we understand all of that, the main page quality factors that we want to be thinking about are the purpose of the page itself. Do we know why this page exists? We want to, and we're going to explore in more detail in just a second, EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. This is sort of a principle that Google has really been focusing on for quite a while now, but we're just sort of talking about it more and trying to define, I think, these things in more detail. But that EAT quality is really important. The main content of the page has to be well written. It has to be spelled correctly. It's great when that page has links back to it. And then how long that main content quality is can affect things as well. So we know that's the case, that long form content and short form content perform differently in Google search, and that long form content, if it is attached to informational and investigative intent, can be much more valuable. Short form content is also appropriate when there's other types of intent. So it's important to not leave out those kind of core principles like intent, because that should be directly related to the purpose of the page. And then, of course, the website information as a whole and the website reputation or authority as a whole is going to play into how well this singular page does, right? So that's why pages on sites that already have high rankings, lots of traffic, lots of links, when those types of websites add new pages, they tend to see results more quickly. And it's because of that overall sort of quality and credibility that they have in general. So to dig a little bit more into understanding the EAT principle, right? It's expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Essentially what Google is saying is that they want to see on pages that are ranking higher and getting more Google traffic that the EAT is sort of demonstrated. And so this is where we can assume that Google is paying attention to what brand or even what person authored or created the main content of a page, right? So this goes back to the importance of branding, the importance of reputation. Google can see all of that. It might not directly impact rankings in a sort of causational way, but if we think again about the holistic view of making your website authoritative and relevant and credible, then we can see how Google looks to the rest of the internet to understand your brand's reputation and your own, if you're an author and your name is on things, your own reputation. Authoritativeness of that person, of the main content itself, and of the website. So I feel like there's three things coming together, right? If there's an author listed, if you're a blogger, if you're featuring a special article, if you're quoting different experts in your company on your website, that's going to go into play, along with how well the content is written and how high quality is, as well as the overall website and what the authoritativeness of that website is. All three of those things are being considered. And then there's a trustworthiness factor, right? And I think when we look at expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, this is where we can see that the links back to your website, what types of websites are linking to you, the quality of those websites, how well your social media is performing, how many mentions your brand, you as an individual, your products are getting mentioned out there. All of those things are part of these EAT variables. And high EAT, which I think improves quality, this can happen in any industry. So there's a lot of different opportunities that you have here. So I just wanted to put in some examples for you to think about as far as like how EAT is applied to different things, and where Google is really looking, I think, to have higher standards than, let's say, social media. So in the world of social media, there's a lot of debate about what's accurate, what's factual, all of that. Google, I think, has been very dedicated to trying to make sure that their search results come back with, like I said, high quality content that is accurate and factual and is actually being backed up by multiple sort of sources and people and brands on the internet that say this is legitimate information. So we see this especially with medical advice. They want to see medical expertise, accreditations. They want to see that content coming from doctors, hospitals, things like that, researchers. News articles, they want to see having a journalistic sort of quality. They want to focus in a lot on factually accurate content. And I think that's because, like I said, there's so much criticism right now in general about a lack of that online. If you're talking about scientific topics or financial, legal, tax topics, all these things that are regulated and that are based on, actual kind of factual data and research, or laws and things like that. They want to see that stuff coming from websites and people and brands that are really, truly credible and saying something legitimate. This, I think, you're going to see especially when it comes to regulated industries. So if you're in the healthcare industry, the legal industry, things like that, where it's important that you really understand what you're allowed to say online and not say, Google's putting more attention on that stuff. But then we also move into things that I think are seem like more of a gray area, and that's advice pages on different websites about everything from things like home remodeling or parenting issues or what restaurants or products are great. One good example I heard was, websites where people who are suffering from different illnesses can come together and share their experiences. These are all places where even if you don't have sort of educational credentials, even if you're not maybe a company or things like that, they will give you some level of expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness based on different criteria. And this is because they see that people interacting on the internet together through their own experience can still produce really strong levels of authoritativeness, right? Really strong levels of relevance. And there's certainly forums and groups and social communities and different even whole websites that are built around people coming together around a topic. And so they really want to make sure that they still value everyday expertise. And I still think, again, when we look at expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness, we want to remember that link building is a big part of that, right? So having other high quality websites that link back to what you're doing is always going to build on that stuff. And then, like I said, to a lesser extent, we see that if you have active social media communities, if you have a great email list and people are clicking over, if people are going to your website and spending time there, looking at multiple pages, all of these types of things are really going to help sort of become a testament to whether or not you're reaching EAT standards. One little side note I want to make is there's something in Google called Your Money, Your Life websites, or YMYL is kind of the acronym we use. And according to Google, any page that includes content that can affect somebody's health, happiness, safety, or financial stability is going to fall into YMYL. They've made changes in their algorithm over the years to make sure that what's showing up at the top of Google for things related to these types of websites, topics, that they're quality. And so if you can see the examples I list here, things again to do with financial information, medical, shopping, legal, public or official information, things about your state governments, your local governments, things about policies and laws, government programs, social services. It's really important to Google that these the types of content for these topics that show up at the top of Google are 100% legitimate. So this is just something to be aware of, especially if you're in the health and wellness field, right, is a good example. Because when Google started making changes to its algorithm around YMYL sites, we saw that the health and wellness field was impacted as much as the medical field. So a lot of this has to do with Like I said, Google wants to serve people by making sure that when they're looking for answers to their text questions or information about their city government, or they're looking for information about medical problems or health and wellness, they're looking for information about how to invest or how to start a retirement fund, that they don't get a scammer at the top, right? That they get something legitimate, trustworthy, credible, and all of that. So keep that in mind, because if you're, a law office, if you're in the health and wellness field, if you're an accountant or a bookkeeper, there could be types of content that fall into that area. And it's going to be especially important that we be thinking about how to make sure that page quality is strong and that you're meeting sort of that EAT kind of standard if you want to see organic search go up. So let me know if there's any questions about what we're talking about and about page quality. I want to make sure if there are any that we have plenty of time. So I'm just going to let you guys, I know it takes a minute to type things in. So if you're typing, feel free. I'm going to keep going on to talk a little bit about Google, but I'll gladly stop at any point to answer questions. But in addition to focusing in on the pages of your website that you want to rank and really thinking about page quality and how it serves people, and like I said, taking a look at the content, taking a look at the layout of the page and all that, the usability, figuring out how you can improve that page overall to achieve its purpose. I think another thing that we have to be aware of with Google in 2020 is that Google's starting to play a different role in people's lives than it used to. So for many years, we all use Google to search for things and then essentially look at all of our options, click on a few websites, kind of see what's happening, right? And then once we'd investigated a few websites, we kind of chose the one we thought was best. That is no longer true, right? So when we look at Google results, we see that we've got local results, we've got product results, we've got video results, image results, we've got the knowledge panel, right? We've got all these different ways that Google actually keeps us in the search engine instead of getting us to click on websites. And this has been going on for the last decade, but it's really coming to a head now. And this article that I linked to on this slide from Rand Fishkin, I think is really interesting. I'm going to pull it up in just a minute. But he basically says the largest source of traffic on the web, free and paid, is becoming a walled garden, intent on not only keeping people on its own properties, but competing directly with those that helped it become a dominant monopoly power. And what Rand talks about in this article is that zero-click searches are on the rise, especially on mobile devices. And what zero-click search means is that somebody went to Google, asked it something or typed something in, and essentially got what they needed directly from Google. So they did not click anywhere else. And I think it makes sense that this is happening on mobile more frequently than it is desktop. So I want to just show you this interesting graph in the presentation that Rand shares. So at the end of 2019 in September, they were looking at Google mobile browser search clicks. And as you can see, 56.1% was zero-click searches. So you can see the blue is searches with organic clicks. That means that somebody searched for something, looked at the organic results, and clicked on the website. A little under 5% essentially was ad clicks, but 56% were people who got the answer that they needed or got whatever they were searching for directly on Google and then left, right? That's a huge number, in my opinion. If we look at desktop, you'll see that this is a little bit better scenario because on desktop, people in general tend to be spending more time and investigating more and doing deeper dives into things. But we still saw 34.85% zero-click searches on desktop at the same time frame. Of course, organic searches do a lot better here. Advertising does about the same. So again, if you're B2B and you know business to business, more people are using their desktop, or you look at your Google Analytics and you can see that 50 to 60% of people coming to your website or more are using their desktop, then you're going to have a better chance of getting organic clicks. But if you're a business where a lot of your traffic is coming from mobile, it's important to just realize that that might also reflect that a lot of people are getting the information they need right on Google about your business through Google My Business and other things, and that they don't need to click through organically from their mobile device as frequently. So I think this is just an interesting thing to think about, because when I work with restaurants, we see that a lot of their traffic, the vast majority of it, is mobile. And I think we'll find that a lot more restaurants are not going to get that click through. There's going to be more zero clicks in that world than there would be per se for something like web design, which I do. But you can click on this link and go through all 87 of Rand's slides. I think this is a fascinating take on the fact that Google, which has helped a lot of businesses over the years, is slowly becoming one of our own competitors. And working in the tourism and local marketing space, I think we're going to see this as even more powerful, because Google My Business can sometimes give people all the information that they needed so that they don't ever need to go to your website. So there's a few things you can look for when it comes to this. One, are you seeing that your rankings on Google are going up, but the click-through or your organic search traffic is going way down, right? That can be an indicator that what Google is presenting in its results is satisfying a lot of people's needs, and therefore they don't need to click over to your website. Again, we can't really fix that problem. We can't really compete against Google if they're dominating, but we can be aware, right? And again, I'm going to give you some other things that you can do as action steps to dig into this. The other thing you want to look for is what kind of competition are you seeing for knowledge panel results associated with the top search queries that you want to rank for. So there's going to be certain topics and themes that you're hoping your website shows up for, or maybe even your local result shows up for in Google. It would be important, I think, to take some of those queries, especially if you've already done keyword research, and just run them through Google searches. And I would usually use an incognito window, or maybe even a device or computer or something that I don't use as frequently, so that my personal behavior is not skewing things too much. But when you do that, essentially, you want to see who's holding those knowledge panel results, right? So knowledge panel is kind of when Google just answers the question, right? I ask a question, or I look for a resource, and Google just provides it at the top. Sometimes it's a sort of bullet list of information from an article. Sometimes it's a video. But you want to start investigating how are those searches, what kind of content are they producing, and where is it coming from? Because to me, if people can get the answer right at the top in the knowledge panel, or they can talk to their Google Home and Google will read the answer essentially from that knowledge panel, then I might not get as much value out of showing up at the top in the organic results, because by the time that knowledge panel is up there, then there's usually local listings or video listings, and then there's organic. That's pretty far down the page. So I just think investigating kind of what's going on with competition is going to be important. And whenever you see that there's, a good question that doesn't have a knowledge panel answer, I see that as an opportunity. So if I type in a question or a topic and there's nothing that pops up right at the top, I'm going to start thinking about how maybe for that particular query, we can create a page that really answers that question, or a video that really answers that question, because those things might get to the top even before our website can, which might be valuable. And then one thing I thought was interesting in reporting from this article was that Google sends 14% of all clicks back to its own properties. So Google has this long list of websites that it owns, and sometimes it drives people directly into their own next tool instead of driving it to other people's websites or other companies' websites. So a good example of this is Google Maps, right? A lot of times when I'm looking for a business or organization, Google is going to produce information for me in the search engine that then just leads me directly to Google Maps, or leads me directly to Google Business, or leads me, directly into Google Shopping, all of which belong to them. So it's a click-through, but it's not to anybody else other than Google. So this is where Rand is really making that argument that Google is now moving into a place where it's such a usable technology and people are relying on it for so much that it's kind of taking over. Instead of driving traffic to websites, it's now essentially providing answers directly in its own world and keeping people there. So I see a great question. Hi, Sarah, can you define or show an example of the Google Knowledge Panel? Yeah, absolutely. So let's just do that really quickly. Sorry, let me just exit out of here. And so essentially, if we just go to Google, and again, this would be the same if I was speaking something into my phone or into my Google Home. If I just put in a question like, who is the Queen of England? I'm just going to get the answer at the top, right? So the knowledge panel is where they're usually pulling in information from different places, and Google is just kind of giving you the answer. I don't need to scroll down and look at websites or any of that. You can also do searches like how to make chocolate cream pie. Again, a lot of times I'll get these results right at the top with recipes, right? So that's like another part where it's just gonna pop that right in there. And then of course, here's videos, right? So we've got all these different things. The people also ask area. This is another sort of part related to the knowledge panel, right? Where it's just showing me questions and giving me the answers right there. So by the time I get to organic, you know, we're all the way down, over halfway down the page essentially. And so I see this question, one of my articles was featured in the knowledge panel. It can be useful for long term or short term. Can you clarify that question? I don't really understand what you mean. Can it be useful for long-term or short-term rankings? Is that what you're kind of asking? Like how long you can expect it to stay up there? Can you just clarify a little bit what you mean? Yeah, so the great thing is once you get into the knowledge panel, truthfully, that should have a long-term effect if that page continues to get traffic. Right? So if it's showing up in the knowledge panel and people keep engaging with it, it should actually stay there over the long term. And it's actually going to be pretty hard, I think, for anybody to knock you out of the way unless their page has much better quality. So in order to even kind of end up replacing you in the knowledge panel, their page has to have as much traffic, as much links, and get as much engagement for Google to even consider putting it up there, from my understanding. So yeah, so that should be like a long-term value of reaching that placement, right? And again, one of the things you can do with that page that'll help is to continue to share it out, continue to drive people to it. Anytime that you can sort of re-mention that page and engage people, share it on social media and get people to look at it, that's going to continue to build the quality of the page. And I see your question about what's your take on schema. So schema is an interesting topic. Do I think it's worth it? I do think it's worth it in certain cases. I think a lot of times if you're a brick and mortar location, having the schema for your physical address is important. I think if you are doing, like a good example would be if you're a movie theater, you probably really need to do the schema on the movies and the films as well as your physical location, right? So I see a lot more opportunities with brick and mortar. I see a lot more opportunities with products and things like that. So I think if you have an e-commerce website, you want to spend time there. Personally, for me, when it comes to schema on smaller websites, I haven't seen as much power. And a lot of those smaller websites are service-based businesses. I haven't seen as much power. So it's like I'm kind of looking at the opportunities with schema, and I think there's definitely some things if you're promoting, like I said, books, film, things like that are valuable. If you have a product-based website, that can be valuable. If you're a brick and mortar location, that can be valuable. I've also used a little bit of schema related to reviews. I think that can be helpful. But I think there's more kind of industry things that are stronger than saying it works for everybody in general. Great. And then I see these other questions. So what is schema? Schema is essentially a code that you add to different pieces of content on your website in order to add kind of more dynamic, to create a more dynamic presentation in the results. And so let me see if I can get the system to show us quickly just an example of this. But it's basically a little bit more of it's a little more technical aspect of SEO. It's not the easiest thing to do on your own unless you kind of understand the coding of the website and where to place things. But it's basically going to enhance these types of results, right? So if I write schema for reviews, sometimes your reviews show right here in the actual result. And there's other things that you can do, like your address can show up in your organic results. So hopefully that makes sense, but it's like a coding piece, and they have all these rules around how the code can be added and to what it can be added to when it comes to your website. And then I see this other question from Mitt. An FAQ page is useful for IT sites. FAQ is trending nowadays. So I'm assuming you're in the IT industry. FAQ pages are actually a great thing for everybody to consider. Essentially because FAQs can actually become a great page that might get pulled into the knowledge panel if it's written correctly. But I do think you want to do a lot of due diligence on creating your FAQs. You want to sort of know all the questions people ask. You maybe want to do some keyword research to understand how people type those queries in or speak them in. And you really kind of want to design the page to be super useful. It's easy for a longer FAQs page to become really cluttered and frustrating. But because FAQ pages typically lay things out so that there's bullet points and short answers to things, again, they actually give you potential for showing up in the knowledge panel. So it's just about kind of really strategizing that page and then watching how well it performs and maybe even adding to it over time and growing it over time. Great, so I'm gonna hold off because I need to wrap up for everybody, and I'll answer that question in one moment, but I wanna make sure I have time to wrap up the action steps for everyone. And then we'll continue with questions. So the action steps I wanna give everybody about what we talked about today is, one, review your top landing pages and the keywords associated with them in your Google Search Console. If you're not using the Google Search Console, it's free. You need to use the same account that you used to create your Google Analytics and go sign up for the Google Search Console. You can just Google it, right? And Google will take you right there. If that is set up on your website, you're gonna be able to see all of the keyword phrases that you're ranking for, your average rankings, what the click-through rate is, and all the landing pages that Google suddenly sees as doing well. You'll also be able to go to Google Analytics and look at your organic search traffic. And there you can see the landing pages that are performing really well on Google there as well. So I like to use those two tools, identify the top 10 or 20 pages that are doing well on Google. And when I find things that are lower down on page 1, maybe on page 2, 3, 4, 5, I start to see those as opportunities to better optimize that content. Think about the purpose of the page and think about how I can increase the expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness of the page. So can I have an expert talk about something and add a quote from them? Can I link over to them? Can I get more links back to the page itself by sharing it out more frequently? Can I expand the content to include more things? Can I add a video? All of those things that could increase EAT, I want to think about. Also, you may have done keyword research in the past, but I want to suggest to everybody that you continue doing keyword research every year, maybe even a couple times a year, to generate new ideas of what people need and want, and then think about how you can build out pages with main content and sections with supplementary content that really kind of focus on these topics. So this is about finding things you're not ranking for, looking for how people talk about them, understanding the audiences and how they search, and then creating something really useful to them. So I think that's something you can be doing, everybody can be doing, to expand their websites and, again, improve how you're showing up on search engines. And then finally, I want to encourage everybody, especially if you're at the beginning of the business, you've never done SEO, really brainstorm how you can increase the brand's expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness in 2020. So this is what we've talked about a lot in the past on these calls, is these sort of things that we can do. How can we increase backlinks to different pages? How can we increase our social media engagement, get them to share our content more, click through to our website more? so that we can increase our website traffic, get people to click on our email marketing and go look at our website more. Once we get them to the website, how can we keep them there? How can we get them to do more things and engage with the website? How can we increase our Google reviews? How can we use more multimedia content, create a YouTube channel, start using video more frequently on our websites, and to get better search results? This is something in 2020 you really want to think about, because that equality, I think, is going to become more and more of a defining pillar. So again, we're going to get back into questions. Thank you all for being here, because I know a lot of you have to get back to work. If you're in the Asheville area, I do have a class on this coming up. It's a half-day class that I'll be doing with the local AIGA Asheville chapter. So I've put the link in here. If you want to dig into this and actually get some stuff done, this is going to be a half-day workshop where we actually do the work. I'm really excited. It'll be down at the Foundry Hotel. Also, I've put in some recommended tools for you to click on and dig into. So if you want to learn more about this stuff, stay up to date with what is happening in the world of SEO, you can do that. And then, of course, we've got all our information about the JB Media Institute. So you can learn about our online classes and also some of our free resources. But again, I really appreciate everybody being here. As we say in the office, you do amazing things. More people should know. But again, I'm glad to stay for a little bit and continue to take questions. So Mitt, I see your question was, the FAQs in the H2 tags could be more useful for users, I guess, and for Google too. So again, I want to just clarify, I think what you're talking about is how to format the page of your FAQs. And I think the typical best practice is to have one H1 on the page, one H2 on the page, and then if you have multiple headings that you're going to have, let's say the question for each, FAQ's got a question, then an answer. Each question, I would usually put those as H3s, not necessarily H2s, because if I have a bunch of questions, I'm going to end up with a whole bunch of H2s. I don't think that's a make or break. I mean, if you really wanted to have a bunch of H2s on the page, if the page is valuable, I don't think you're necessarily going to get penalized. But I will say in general, H3s are usually the thing that we repeat multiple times. So yeah, awesome. I'm really, really glad that was helpful to you. And again, if there's anyone else who's got questions, I'm glad to continue. Jesse, I see your question is, we're transitioning our website from WordPress to Shopify in order to begin selling via e-commerce. I've been looking into all of our to-do lists about SEO during the transition, and I know this is a big topic, but I was wondering if you had any major tips. So yes, this is an amazing question. I'm so glad that you're asking it. And yes, Mitt, I will definitely, I'll accept your LinkedIn request, I promise. So anyway, Jesse, I feel like there's a couple things that need to happen. The first thing is you need to talk to the person who's shifting the website and make sure that they do what we call 301 redirects. That means every old URL from your WordPress website needs to be 301 redirected to the Shopify URLs of your new website. Otherwise, what you're going to do is hit a total reset. And that means any authority that your WordPress website built will go away and you will start over in the search engines. So that's something that can be really damaging if you're not careful. And Mitt, you will have this presentation. A link will be sent out tomorrow so that you can download it, and you'll also get a copy of the recording, right? So Jesse, essentially you want to have that conversation right away, because before the WordPress website goes away, you need to sort of gather all the URLs from that website, which your designer or developer should be able to do. And so essentially, that's a big thing that has to happen when the Shopify site goes live. What that 301 redirect does is it's basically a coding way to tell Google all of the authority that these pages had should now be transferred to these pages over here. If you don't do that, again, the other thing that will happen is any links that were coming to your WordPress website might break if the URLs are not exactly the same on your Shopify website. So that would also cause you to lose a lot of your backlinks to your domain, which really hurts your overall authority. So let me know if you have questions about that. It's called 301 redirects. And what you don't want the designer to do is take all your new Shopify URLs and or all your old WordPress URLs and just send them to the homepage of your Shopify site. If possible, you want to send each individual old page to a relevant new page, right? And so that I think is like the biggest piece that you're going to want to dig into and think about. The other thing I'd be cautious about is don't just delete pages altogether unless you've gone into your Google Analytics and you've looked at under acquisition channels, the organic search, and then clicked on landing pages. That when you can see which pages of your WordPress website were driving the most traffic from Google, those are the URLs that are most important, because that's like a faucet turned on coming from Google, traffic coming from there. When that page just goes away, it's like turning off the faucet. So you want to know which pages of your old website were the most valuable and driving the most traffic. Try to preserve that as much as possible. And so I see your other question. If you properly do the 301 redirects, do you think we'll see little to no change? You will definitely see change. And the goal hopefully will be that you'll rebound from it later. But when you change platforms, you actually will always lose traffic no matter what. So you need to be prepared that if Google has been driving a ton of your business, it could be really upsetting when you switch platforms, because there will be a dip sometimes for 3 to 6 months. And there's like sort of no way to do that without seeing that dip in some way. But again, make sure you have the Search Console, make sure you do the 301 redirects. Those are the best way that you can understand how Google is seeing the shift. And hopefully you're not changing your domain, because to Mitt's question, if you're changing your domain, what can you do step by step to let Google know it's still the same? You can't. Changing your domain is just it will affect your authority, and you're going to have to accept that effect. When you change, like basically for us as SEO experts, we would never change a domain name on a website unless we absolutely had to, especially if that website was already performing well. Because even more than 301 redirects, changing your domain name can actually, it's just a reset button that you can't avoid, Mitt. So there is not really a lot of step-by-step stuff you can do. You can do the 301 redirects from your old domain to your new. You can use the Google Search Console to verify your new domain and really help Google understand what's happening. But they see a change of domain as a major change to a business website, and so it always has a kind of negative impact. So again, if there's any other questions, please feel free to type them in, and I'm glad to continue talking for a few more minutes. And then Jesse, I see your question about having a new separate domain that links to the original domain name website. So I think that's what I was just talking about. But are you instead meaning if you have another like a second domain name that just redirects to the original domain? Yeah. But I mean, essentially, if you change your current domain name to a new one, it's going to always cause, you're just having to reset with Google in a lot of ways, and you're going to have to build up domain authority, right? And so that's kind of the thing. And so if you have website.com and keep that with no changes, but you also have website2.com and you redirect it. So yeah, that won't hurt you in any way. It doesn't help you either. Like, you're not going to get more Google authority from redirecting domains, right? But it's not going to hurt you in any way either. So a lot of times we'll have a longer domain. Like, I worked with a company that had a long domain with the name of the business and personal injury attorney at the end. So it was really long. So we had a shorter domain that we could put on our visual marketing that redirected people to the longer domain. That's totally normal. You can do that, but it has nothing to do with SEO.